it's saying recording will start soon.
Okay.
There we go.
Here it goes.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
It's 5:30, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. I know Renee said that she's actually going to be a little late, so we can go ahead and get started. Any additions or changes to the agenda? None. Moving on. Are there any members of the public here who would like to comment on something that is not on the agenda? That as well. All right. In that case, moving on, item 4.1, the meeting minutes from May 18th. Hopefully everybody has had a chance to view those. I would look for a motion to approve. Chris, who disappeared? Oh, there you are. Or Gina?
What?
Second.
Second. All right. All in agreement? Meeting minutes pass. Moving right along to new business, the FY22 budget revote outcome. I'm sure everybody has heard by now, the budget did pass in both the city and the town. And the budget that passed is marked 5.1 in our regular meeting packet. And then there has been a change to the projected comparative tax rates. It looks like the revised section is in the addendum. Lisa, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So we received an email from Brad James, and I've included that. The legislature, was part of the miscellaneous bill, and typically it's the last one that ever that passes through the House, but it was signed by the governor just a few days ago, and it announces a property yield of $11,317. When the tax commissioner announced on December 1st the property yield, it was announced at $11,385. So the higher the yield, it pushes the tax rate down. So this changed slightly, and you can see the change brought the Barre City homestead tax rate to a 1 cent increase, and Barre Town to -28. So changed slightly. And that is typical at this time of the year, which is why we always show this as projected. So fortunately, the equalized pupils did not change, and everything else remains the same.
Okay, thank you. Is there, we're still waiting on the common level of appraisal to get the definitive things, right? That's why it still says projected?
Correct.
Okay.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Once we have that, once we have all of the different pieces in place, and once the new property tax bills have been released, which I think we said it was going to be the end of this month, do we or does someone create any kind of calculator that people can use to estimate their property taxes? Because we should be able to do it at that point, right?
Yes. So what will happen is you'll get your reappraisal if you're a Barrytown resident. I believe they said toward the end of this month, but your tax bills don't come out till August. But typically the Agency of Education will calculate the tax rates and share them with me. So we can certainly at that point have a final tax rate and calculate what bills will look like.
I think, you know, people, I mean, obviously there's been a lot of concern that this budget, even with the drop in rate, is going to increase people's property taxes. There's so many moving pieces. I think that it would help us. I mean, I'm assuming we're going to continue to have conversations about the budget and how we're spending money. And I think it would help us to have some definitive answers around that. And I don't design websites, but I think that it should be pretty simple to put together maybe a simple calculator that someone could link to from the BUUSD website with, you know, no promises. Don't call us if this isn't exactly right, but based on the information we have.
Absolutely, we could certainly, once we have the homestead education tax rate, of course, there's always the municipal tax rate that we won't be able to. That would be an additional amount on your tax bill. Yes.
That sounds like a great idea, Gina. And I'm wondering if it's not something that we could push to the communications committee. Chris, are you on that committee? No? Okay. Yeah.
I can connect with Josh.
Okay.
So that we
any other questions about the FY22 budget? Seeing none. I do see that we've got somebody has called in with a phone number ending in 39 because of open meeting law. Could you please just state your name for the minutes?
Sue Paxton.
Thank you. Okay, moving right along. Item 5.2 is the revenue anticipation note. Lisa?
Yeah, typically this doesn't come to the finance committee, but it was on the agenda for the board meeting in June, which it typically is. However, because we would normally have a budget passed in March, there's a 30-day rescind period. So because we had a voter approved budget on June 9th, it's a month before, 30 days before we can do anything with this budget. So the community bank has issued a revenue anticipation note proposal. It's a rate of 1.79 with a reinvestment rate of 2.19. And so we will bring the documents to be signed to the board meeting on July 8th. And although the 30 days won't be up, the board can make a motion and take action on the documents and approve the chair to sign the documents. So,
Okay.
on behalf of the board.
Okay.
So I just wanted to really give you a heads up.
Okay. So this, we don't need to take any action on this. It'll be coming before the board. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Just for information.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any questions about that? No. Moving right along, RFPs and summer projects. I know Jamie's on the call, so I don't know which one of you guys might want to talk about those.
So this is duplicate information from what you received last night from Jamie. He's done a lot of work pulling together these RFPs. You know, last Thursday you approved the bleachers. The Berry City roof was approved the prior meeting. You've approved the copier renewal as well as the snowplow renewal. Things are moving along. We also, the auditorium work will be taking place in July. So things are moving along nicely. Jamie had also provided the 5-year facility draft plan and other capital and major repairs for each building. And that was information, Sarah, that you had requested. So when we get to the point where we're talking about the potential of the board assigning some of the surplus funds to the capital project funds, this will come in handy.
Yes. Before we get to those, is there any questions about the RFP schedule? Or I know we've seen a lot of this already. Josh Howard?
Yeah, I was wondering why we're not paying for any of these projects out of the capital infrastructure that we have already. And I was also wondering how much money from the current budget is going into the capital infrastructure budget. And I guess why don't we use it for infrastructure?
Well, I can tell you that we were told a few years ago that we needed to, well, it was recommended in the industry to start putting $1 per square foot for each of the buildings into the budget. And that's not necessarily to do big projects, but keep up with the maintenance of the buildings and make sure that we're staying on top of things. A few of the budgets over the past few years, we have had to cut that from $1 down to, and this year's budget is 75 cents a square foot. So when we're talking about, almost $500,000, we're cutting quite a bit. So while we do have the capital reserve fund, I think there's about 300,000 in it. There are projects that do require keeping up with throughout the year. And I believe each of the projects on this list are coming from the budget, not necessarily from the capital reserve fund. I mean, we've got the funds in there. I think maybe we have a lot of plans. So did I answer your question? No?
Not really. I actually asked what the total from this current budget is going into the fund. And I know there's $350,000 in there. And I mean, like the roof project, that's what that money's for. The bleachers, that's what that money's for. I just want to know why we're mismanaging the funds. We had the money sitting there for these projects, but we're gonna pad the budget up instead. It's like almost like you're earmarking for some other expenditure in the future. Like you're trying to just keep that so next year you can say, well, we cut this money out, we could spend on something different. I'd much rather see it actually get used for what the intention is. I have no problem with putting 75 cents a square foot in there. I think it makes sense, but it only makes sense if you actually use it for what it's made for instead of padding the budget up every year.
Jamie, I'm going to go ahead and let you answer.
Yeah, well, projects are being from our annual from the
Hey, Jamie, you're cutting out. If you want to shut off your video, it might help your connection.
Okay.
Just so you know.
Okay. Oh, hear me okay?
It's better
Jamie,
now.
I think if you shut your camera off, I still can't hear you.
I did shut my camera off.
Oh, you're still, oh, there we go.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll defer to Lisa and speak to that. She can speak to it probably as well.
Yeah, so we have large buildings that require, as I'm sure you can imagine, a lot of preventative work, as well as roofing needs throughout, the district. So Jamie has put together, and I'm not sure if you saw in the packet of the 5-year facility plan. Every year our buildings are very well maintained. They're efficient. And every year, I mean, it is a standard to have a sufficient amount of money in your budget. So it's also wise to have a capital projects funds in case there's an emergency, for example, a boiler system. So, when we're doing projects, they are, a boiler system project is around $300,000. So we're talking about large facilities that require a lot of money to maintain, and the preventative maintenance is so important, because when you don't keep up your the metallic fittings throughout the building for the HVAC systems, you can potentially run into having to repair something because you haven't cared for your buildings throughout the year. So I wasn't as eloquent as Jamie would be.
But I don't think, I'm sorry to perseverate on this issue. I don't think that's what Josh is asking. I think that he understands that we have big facilities and we have to take care of them. I think what he's asking is, why are we spending our money the way that we're spending it? And why are we pulling money from specific parts of the budget? Why, I think if I had to put words in his mouth, he's asking why we aren't taking the $1.4 million surplus that we say we're going to have and putting it into a capital projects budget and just using all of that money for that. And Josh, I appreciate your participation in these meetings, but please, I caution you to come and accuse the board of mismanaging school finances. I think that that's a pretty broad statement to be making. And I know, having been on this committee, this is my 3rd year on this committee, people work very, very hard to manage this budget responsibly. That goes for the board and the administrator. So I don't think that's a fair assessment of how the board has been handling the budget.
Jamie, did you want to try and chime in?
Yeah. Can you hear me better now?
Yes, that's better.
Okay. So I'll kind of start over where I was going with this. We have an annual budget, for capital maintenance projects, and all of our projects that we're doing is being pulled from that annual budget this year. The only additional funds that we're pulling is for Berry City Elementary School roof. Again, because we downsized the budget from the $1 a square foot to 75 cents a square foot, we need additional funds to take care of that roof. I think we're all in agreement, that taking care of the roof is very important, and that's why we all agreed to approve that project. So we are pulling some funds from the surplus to help pay for that roof project. But the high school auditorium project is from the annual budget. The bleachers for Berry Town is from the annual budget. And to reiterate as well, yeah, we work very hard to protect our budget and spend our budget wisely. So I would echo that sentiment from Gina as well. It's not an appreciated comment.
Josh, does that answer your question?
It's close. I mean, I guess on the budget, the whole budget and the reasonable finances like that, I'd say that's debatable, Gina, simply because 44% of the people that voted disagree with you on that one. As far as whether we need a new roof on a school or not, I'm not debating that. I understand maintenance needs to happen. What I'm asking is simply we have $350,000 already sitting in a capital infrastructure budget in a fund. We already have that money. We're putting another $500,000 in this year? So it's $850,000, or how much are we putting in this year was my first question. I heard 500,000, but
if we were to put in $1 per square foot, we would be putting in 492,500. We are only putting in 75% of that.
So about 300 grand, something like that. So you have $650,000 sitting there, and it's great to have that money sitting there, but it only makes sense if you actually use it for what it's intended for instead of keep taking it out of the regular budget. We already paid this money. Please just use it for that. That's the mismanagement I'm talking about.
So Sarah, I think what Josh is saying is that he doesn't agree with putting money into a capital projects fund, like a reserve fund. So not about
I totally agree with putting in a reserve fund. I disagree with just not using it. It's there. I understand. I do the same thing in my household. I have a budget for repairs and stuff like that. I like to have a good capital infrastructure fund of my own. Same thing with my apartment building. So if something pops up, I can pay for it. But I'm not going to say, oh, my apartment building needs a new roof. I'm going to double the rent on everybody and pay for it that way. I already had the money sitting there. That's what that money's for. So it's taken care of quickly. Instead of saying, well, I'm going to have to charge one some more money because the roof went bad. It doesn't really work like that. I mean, you have a capital infrastructure fund. I'm asking you guys to use that for the capital infrastructure.
So, and I would argue that it's very important to have a reserve fund in the event you have an emergency and you need funding to take care of a project or a piece of machinery or equipment that, exceeds your budget.
And I agree with that. I'm not arguing that one bit. I agree with having the fund sitting there. I disagree with not using it. That's what I'm trying to say.
Thank you, Josh. Jamie?
So I think part of what we're supposed to discuss tonight is, of that amount of surplus money that we have, how much do we want to appropriate towards these larger, capital improvements, capital repairs? I believe that's part of what we're supposed to be talking about tonight. in this spreadsheet, as far as, the past few years and future years of these major projects that we've completed and projects yet to be done, as well as the, I'm going to call it the shopping list that I provided of the 4 buildings in our district, the big ticket items, the roofs, the parking lots, the asbestos floor tiles, things like that. That's what I addressed last night in facilities committee is if we have some surplus funds, let's put some in a capital reserve and direct it towards these large projects, because they're projects that are so large, we're never going to get on top of it with an annual budget. And by reducing this budget from the $1 to 75 cents, we're deferring it even further.
Right.
And I used the word last night, when I used the word deferred, I use that cautiously, because when I hear the word deferred, it's like you've ignored it and you've pushed it off. The term deferred for us, I would like to use is that deferred in the sense that we haven't had the money to address the projects. We haven't ignored it. We haven't, forgot about it. We simply don't have enough money. So if you have surplus funds that we can use, put in a reserve and pick away at the larger, what I'm going to say the most important ones, that's what that money is for. So again, I think that's part of what we're supposed to talk about tonight. So that's the logic behind it as far as I understand it.
Thank you, Jamie. Terry, did you have a comment?
I just a question. I think I heard Lisa mention it. Where is the 5-year facility plan? If I wanted to take a peek at that, it's on the website somewhere.
It was in the agenda packet.
Okay, so just if I hit that link, I'll find it.
Yep, probably a dozen pages in, maybe.
Okay, thank you.
Lisa, just a heads up, I'm not sure if it was just my packet when it got printed or not, but the 5-year plan that I received in my packet is missing page 2.
Oh, okay.
And I haven't double checked the website to see if it's there, but if not, it was distributed. It can be found in the facilities committee packet from last night's meeting.
Oh,
It's there in its entirety.
thank you.
Okay. I'm gonna move on from summer projects to review grant funding. And I believe there is an item in the addendum packet, page 4. Lisa, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So we've had a lot of conversations around the funding that we've received due to COVID. We also have a consolidated federal programs grant that Mary Ellen oversees and manages. So we're obligated by the federal government and US Ed to share information about these grants. They have a lot of requirements. So all federal grants require procurement. They require all employees who are paid through the grants to complete time and effort documentation. So there's a lot of requirements involved. And in addition, then reaching out to our community to make sure that they're involved in the decision making, that they're informed about what we're spending these funds on. So we're also being careful to align all of our expenditures with a BUUSD design and mission and vision plan. You've heard a little bit about the Berry 35 recovery plan, and that's linked to ESSER 2. So we've it started with a needs assessment and moved into a recovery plan. There's 4 categories that major categories that fall under that particular plan, as well as the CFG and ESSER 3. So those are student achievement, student engagement, social emotional support, health and wellness, equity, and then in addition, capital improvements. So I've outlined some of the examples of where the administration, through surveys, through different outreach and consultation with many stakeholders, and we're going to be continuing to reach out and let our community be informed and be a part of how we're managing these funds. And in the chart, you can see some of the investments that we're planning to spend money on. Mary Ellen, do you have anything you want to add?
No. Other than we are taking feedback, so we'd love to hear your thoughts about that. I think we're in the process of putting together a survey that will be on the website so that you can give input and feedback on the direction that we're going. And hopefully it is, like Lisa said, all aligned in the same direction. Our recovery plan is broken down by components. Our design plan is matched with those same components, and our resources match the areas that we've identified in the plans. So everything is coordinated and consolidated, and Lisa and I have been coordinating between the ESSER grant and the consolidated federal grant so that it's all in sync.
Okay, thank you. It looks like we have some questions. Terry, was your hand still up from before? Do you have another question?
Oh,
No?
sorry.
Okay.
Nope.
Josh?
I guess my question is, how long are these grants going to be running for? Like, when are they going to run out? And are people being hired under this under the understanding that when a grant runs out, they're out of a job? Is that being very clear to them, or what's the story there? Because my concern is this how budgets usually get jacked up over time. As grants run out, then you keep positions and get more grants. Those run out, keep positions, and it keeps growing the budget like that. So I just want to make sure we're going to avoid that as much as possible.
The period of performance is September 30th, 2024. So it's about a 3-year period of time. And we are tracking very carefully the staff that we're hiring, hoping through attrition as people retire. The goal is that there will be some intense and substantial, assistance to bring these students back, to, close the gaps that COVID, had caused. Mary Ellen, you can probably speak to this better. About
there are some positions that it's because of the COVID experience that we've been through that we have an additional need. We're not anticipating that those needs are going to be permanent. We have a large need next year. It should decrease the year after. It should decrease the year after. And then in combination with what Lisa's saying, you've probably heard us talk about, we have a shortage now of hiring qualified applicants for positions. It's really getting to a low number of applicants for each of the positions. And we're talking about classroom teachers. We're talking about not COVID experiences, but the general needs that we have just to run the school, to have adequate coverage for all the kids in every grade. And so what we are hoping is that as the needs for the additional COVID expenses decrease, that those people will be able to fill in the vacancies that we have in other areas so that it's a smooth transition. But yes, everybody who's grant funded knows that they're grant funded, and they know that that is a year-to-year basis, that it changes every year.
Andrea, do you have a question?
I do, and I may be reaching really far with this, but I was noticing the last category, capital improvements, and it's talking about, fencing, school property, playgrounds, etc. For those who didn't have the benefit of attending last night's facilities meeting, there was discussion on the athletic fields at Spalding High School. And what a lot of folks don't realize is our track isn't even legal to hold meets on. We hold meets, they don't count. Our athletic fields are in very poor condition. and estimates for all the work that needs to be done. What was it running, Jamie? 4 million, 2 million? So yeah, 4 million. So I was just wondering if any of the improvements to the athletic fields at the high school, could any of those possibly be covered under that section of the grant? And I'm reaching here, but you know, we've had these issues for many years and we never come up with the money for it.
And Lisa probably can talk to that a little bit, because the improvements that we have must be COVID related, right, Lisa?
Yeah. There must be a connection to COVID. So when it comes to our air systems, HVAC systems improvements, that clearly we can connect to COVID. You know, I think the fields is reaching, and although it sounds like $10 million is a lot of money, we, you know, over a 3-year period, the funding to cover the staffing, and I think that this money was meant to for student improvement. And while yes, there are some projects we will hopefully be able to get approval on, it must be pre-approved by the agency, and they would prefer it be more student-centered projects and investments.
So Lisa, I'm just, Chris, I see your hand up. I'm just going to add to that. I understand that it's supposed to be student focused, but it also says playgrounds on that list. And I mean, one could argue that, you know, athletic fields are a playground for older children who don't necessarily need a slide. So I'd be curious to see if we couldn't swing that somewhere too.
Yeah. And while these are examples, and these are proposals that our staff and administrators have, you know, hopefully, you know, we can fund these through the grant. They're not set in stone. They are examples and ideas.
Okay, Chris?
Hey, thanks for all those details, Mary Ellen and Lisa. If I'm correct, there's also kind of holds on construction projects in general from the ESSER funds. Am I correct that they're really looking us to hold back on those? And, you know, some of these big type of projects can get into that construction zone. I think another thing to remind folks, and Andrea, you probably recall in 2012, 2013, the Spalding Foundation got the lights out in the field and did a lot of improvements that way, raised a lot of money privately. And I've been connecting with Eddie Rouse, who's the president of that foundation, and looking at potential projects going forward. So I'm looking forward to connecting with him, but that could be a way to get some of that done as well. Jamie, you're familiar with that work, I know, as is Brenda. So there are other ways to get these projects going.
Thank you. Any questions about the grant funding? No. Okay. Let's move on from there. So item 5.5 is a discussion of the surplus from the FY 2021 budget and transferring to reserve funds. So there is, I thought I saw something in the addendum.
Yeah, I shared the GASB 54. It's the Governmental Accounting Standards Board statement 54, and it really just outlines what the different fund balances are and what the board is has the authority to so which of the funds the board has authority to manage or assign. So, you know, when you look at the different fund balance categories, there's non-spendable, that's like a prepaid. So it's not available. A restricted fund balance is a grant, would be an example. Committed is an article that the voters approve, so it's only voter approval, your highest authority. Assigned is the board has the authority to assign a fund balance. And unassigned is usually just general fund that has not been assigned, committed, or isn't restricted. So in speaking with Tyler, our auditor, he suggests and gave me some information about, what the board could assign. And capital projects, the board can assign a fund balance to the capital project fund. They would want to have some, plan for those funds. And so I assured him that, we do have a 5-year plan, as well as several, projects that we have planned, larger projects. In terms of a tax stabilization fund, we would need to ask the voters for approval to move funds, to move any of the surplus to a tax stabilization fund.
Okay, thank you. So in looking at, and this is sort of jumping ahead, but if you look in your packet, item 6.1 shows the FY21 projected, and it looks like we've got a surplus of about $1.8 million this year. So part of that is, and being on the facilities committee, I had asked Jamie to put together this 5-year plan and kind of a list of items that really will need to be taken care of in the future. And I was hoping that the finance committee could come up with a proposal to give to the board about assigning a portion of these funds to that capital reserve fund, knowing that in recent years we haven't always put the $1 per square foot into the annual budget, and knowing that a lot of these projects actually exceed even those amounts. So I don't know if, Jamie, you want to go real quick through, I mean, you don't have to read everything, but just kind of some of the bigger items that we're looking at that will need to be done in the future at the buildings?
Sure. Yeah, briefly. So Berry City Elementary, again, continuing with the roofing replacement. The asphalt parking lot driveways, those are due to be replaced. Exterior siding of the building has been showing signs of failure due to, I guess, inferior methods of when they constructed that siding. That's continuing with the Victalic fitting repair, and what that is, it's the heating system piping and how the pipes are connected together. There's metal and the rubber grommets in there, and over a period of time they start to fail. And that's what allows them to leak. So we replace those fittings with welded pipe. It's been an ongoing project for the last, 6, 7, 8 years. So that's ongoing. Berry Town, again, some more roof replacement. Air conditioning units on the roof. And the reason that building is air conditioned, probably most of you are familiar with Berry Town, but it's an open concept type building, with majority of the building is, centered within itself. So you don't have access to outdoor windows, great airflow. So the reason for centralized air conditioning is what keeps that building comfortable and healthy. Classroom floor tiles, both at Berry Town and Spalding High School. We have asbestos floor tiles. They're safe. They're in good shape. We replace them as they fail, but again, being proactive, replacing those as we can. So again, with more funds, we can speed that process up. Berry Town, again, fencing around the playground area. It's adjacent to a very heavily wooded area. Sometimes hunters come by, animals come by, so fencing. The central office on Air Street, that parking lot is failing, needs to be replaced. The roof on that building is starting to, show some signs that we got to start looking at that roofing as well. Spalding High School, sprinkler system. That building is not fully sprinkled. And we've been dancing that dance with the fire marshals for a while. So that will be revisiting us sometime in the near future. I know of that. So those are, a lot of, well, and in high school, again, about the athletic fields, that's the 1964 athletic complex. It doesn't provide, a safe playable field as it should have, for our student athletes. So those are, large ticket items that would be very, very hard to fund with our annual construction monies. So those are areas that, the surplus monies could be directed towards. Any questions or thoughts?
So I think we can all see, the Berry City, Berry Town buildings, we're, even if we allocate $1 per square foot, that's $150,000, $125,000 a year. So you can understand how just using the annual budget would make a lot of these repairs, kind of obsolete, and we can't fund it. It would be years worth.
Right. And I want to add in there as well, our buildings are very well taken care of.
Right.
They're very healthy. They're in great shape. But at the same time, we would be irresponsible if we didn't start addressing, a lot of these items that I just mentioned. We're aware of it now. Our buildings are not failing, but we have a lot of large ticket items that we need to address. So that's where deferred maintenance would then come in. If we kind of know about this and we kind of just sit on it and don't act on it, then we're being irresponsible and, not taking care of what we should be. So that's kind of why we're here now talking about it, or being proactive. So I want to throw that out there. Our buildings are very healthy. They're in great shape, but we need to keep them that way. And discussions like this are hard to have, but they're needed.
All right, thank you. Any questions? Josh.
Yeah, I'm wondering why we're discussing what account to put it in. My understanding was we were supposed to be discussing from the board meeting last week what to do with the money in general. And I'm just surprised that a refund to taxpayers who obviously you overtaxed and overcharged last year to a tune of $1.8 million isn't even discussed. That being said, there's some compromise sitting there. There's no way to get all those projects done in a year. What if we put $1 million into the capital reserve so that at the end of this year, you'd have what, 1.7 million in it? And that's a good jump. That's a good start. And then refund the rest of it to taxpayers because they're going to be hurting after the big tax raise in Berry Town. That's going to be happening after the appraisal. And I just wonder why we don't discuss that at all. Why it's, you go to any business, they overcharge you go back, they give you your money back. And this seems like, you guys are saying too bad, so sad. It's our money now. We don't care.
Terry?
Question for Jamie. Jamie, with a student that plays on those fields, you said that they're not safe, or things are not safe. What's not safe?
The track, for example, the track is a gravel track. We only host one track meet a year because none of the schools want to come there and run on the track. If you've ever ran on the track and jumped hurdles or tripped and fell on the gravel, you're dug up pretty bad. It's not a fast track either. Nobody wants to run there because they can't get fast times running on that track. So, for example, that's what I mean when I say not safe to run on that track.
I think does it sound like it might be more appropriate to say it's not ideal than not safe? Because for me, with students that are playing on that field, when you say it's not safe, then why am I letting my child play on that track and play on that field? I don't think that's a appropriate characterization.
Yeah. No, fair enough. Yeah, it probably was a bad word to use. It could be a better playing field if we upgraded some of these. So yeah, fair. Fair to say, yes. I acknowledge it. Sure.
Thank you. And second, so Berry Town, a fence around the playground, and hunters show up. Hunters don't show up. There's lots of posters around there, and if there are issues with folks coming through those woods, then we need to put safety zone signs around there on the perimeter. So I don't want to split hairs, but characterizing that hunters are a problem is not something that I think is appropriate when we could put up signs that would alleviate that problem if it was a problem. So don't need to comment, but just wanted to say that.
Sure. No, and I acknowledge that as well. And maybe not saying that hunters are unsafe, but the perception that if you have a lot of students out there playing and a hunter happens to kind of come near that area, they're carrying a rifle in their hands, they're walking through the woods, that the first initial perception is like, oh boy, that could potentially be dangerous. So I guess that's what I meant by my comment. And it has happened through the years, during hunting season, some hunters will come close to that, that limit, that line. And, and folks get, they get a little shocked. They get a little scared when they see somebody with a rifle. In today's world with school violence, it triggers them that for some folks.
Let me stop you, Jamie, because that's not good stuff. So put up the safety zone signs. It's a 500-foot barrier. A hunter 500 feet in the woods is not going to be seen by anybody. So put up the signs.
Yeah. So no, good thought. Yep.
Any questions from my committee members? Been very quiet. Nobody. Okay. Well, as I had mentioned, we do have a $1.8 million surplus. I was hoping to come up with a recommendation for the board. It will be is on the agenda for next week. About, and I guess I misspoke at the last meeting. We can't make a recommendation to put funds back to tax stabilization. That would have to go before the communities. Although I would like to comment that we did basically clean out that tax stabilization fund this year. We took $600,000. I would like to be able to put that back just to help future budgets. But I do think that we should make a recommendation about a figure to put into capital reserves. So I'm open to ideas. Gina? You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'm sorry, I don't have a new question. Can we go back to tax stabilization for a minute? Because we all ignored Josh's question about getting money back to the taxpayers. And I don't feel like we need to go into why it's logistically problematic to actually issue direct refunds to taxpayers. But I do think it's worth pointing out that the tax stabilization fund is essentially that. Is that fair enough? I mean, the tax stabilization fund exists so that we can put money into the budget on behalf of the taxpayers to reduce the burden of taxes. So that is that
the tax stabilization fund does support the revenue and alleviates the burden as much, on the taxpayer. So
okay. So yes. That the tax stabilization fund is our mechanism for essentially returning money that taxpayers have overpaid to the district, returning that money to their benefit for use in future years. Is that fair?
Yes. And so in FY22, $600,000 is being used from tax stabilization to offset taxes.
Okay. And I know that I'm going to literally ask a question that was just answered in what Sarah said, but to take a portion of our surplus and move it into tax stabilization, so effectively doing what Josh is talking about and getting money to a place where it will be used to offset burden to the taxpayers. In order to do that, that has to go to a public vote. Is that what you're saying?
So, when you have an audited surplus, if the board assigns any of that surplus to the capital project fund, or the voters can approve to move some of the surplus to a tax stabilization fund. So
Okay.
currently, the way it stands, you still have 900,000 in your FY20 audit. You had a tax stabilization fund balance of around $900,000. You had an offsetting deficit in the general fund of about 300,000. So that's where we're coming up with about $600,000 in unassigned, you might call it, funds. So now we're in FY21. We're projecting a surplus of approximately 1.8 million. If indeed we move $1 million into the capital project fund, the board would assign it to that reserve fund. You would be left with 800,000. Of that 800,000, 600. So when the auditor classifies your general fund surplus or your fund balance, they would say that 600 is assigned to tax relief, and the remaining 200 is just sitting in your fund balance. Does that?
Yeah, and I guess my follow-up to that is, so if the auditor says that 600 is assigned to tax relief, does that have to go to a vote, or does that happen automatically because we essentially cleared out that account? We're backfilling what we used. Is that right?
It's just sitting in the general fund. We haven't moved it. We haven't transferred any money to a separate fund. It's sitting in your general fund, like your checking account.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to belabor the point, and I can take it offline. And I'm just trying to figure out why, I guess, why tonight we are trying to make a decision about moving funds to making a recommendation to move funds to one type of account, but not necessarily making a recommendation to move all of the funds. I feel like I think if we've got $1.8 million, so $1 million to capital improvement, do we need to make a recommendation for the other 800,000, or is that sort of like, that's going to happen because the auditor is going to say that the 600 goes to tax stabilization and the 200 stays in general? Is that what you're saying?
So I think tonight we're discussing the surplus that we've, because it's pretty extensive and we haven't, been here forever. And so I think the idea behind, what might it look like for the board to, take some of this surplus money and move it to a capital project fund. So you couldn't make a decision tonight. It needs to be a board decision.
Right.
And it, inevitably you'll have an audit, and the audit will determine what your, the final fund balance is.
Okay. And then the capital project fund would fund the long-term projects that Jamie has been talking about, that have tickets that are a little bit higher than we're able to generally float on the annual budget. Or it would also be the thing that we dip into if, all the boilers blow over a weekend and we have to do some kind of massive equipment replacement or some kind of emergency work that can't wait.
Correct.
Okay.
And I think every district in the state of Vermont has a capital reserve fund. I think it's a very wise.
Sure. No disagreement at all. I just wanted to, because where I was getting tripped up, and I'll be honest, I still kind of am, but I'm like embarrassed about how much time I'm taking, is the fact that different funds seem to have different requirements for getting the money into them. And so that is where I'm trying to kind of get my head straight around what the board, I understand we can't do anything now, what the board can recommend, and then what things happen with just board approval and what things require there to be another step in terms of voter approval to make money go into certain accounts. I'm just trying to.
Yeah. And I understand it is somewhat complicated. I've had a several conversations with our auditor to try to understand governmental accounting and all the rules and regulations around what you can and can't do.
Okay.
Okay, so based upon that, and Gina, thank you very much for more eloquently saying what the tax stabilization fund actually does. Do we have thoughts? Is it $1 million that we want to transfer or recommend transferring into capital reserves? Is, you know, based upon the information Jamie shared, the project lists, is that the figure, you know, that was just, you know, thrown out there. So I just want to check and see what everybody's thoughts are. And Josh, I do see your hand up. I'm sorry, I missed by you. Go ahead.
Just a response to Gina. I mean, it was a good twist, but I'm not saying put any money in a tax stabilization fund. I think that residents can probably spend their money better themselves. Tax stabilization fund I kind of see as more of a tool for enabling the ongoing fiscal responsibility that happens. It kind of just covers your butts. You know, it's like, oh, we can pay for all this and we'll just use a tax stabilization fund. Or in negotiations with the teachers unions right now, they're going to say they got $1.8 million sitting there. They're going to see it as money on the table. It's a bad idea. I think residents could spend their own money better. They overpaid it. Just refund it. This isn't like $10,000 for 20,000 people. This is $1.8 million. In Barrytown alone, that would be 25% of the municipal budget. So it'd be 25% of your municipal taxes back. This is not a small change. This can really help people and just hold on to it to say, well, we can just jack the budget up next year. We got $1.8 million sitting there. Is just morally evil.
I understand that you are not equating the two things, Josh. I wasn't trying to imply that you are, and I'm making an assumption, Lisa, and correct me if I'm wrong. I'm making an assumption that there is no mechanism by which the school district can refund taxpayers' money, either logistically or perhaps legally. I'm not sure what the terms are, but it's certainly not something that's done regularly, probably because districts don't often have surpluses. And I'm not certain that it's something that we could do. So the point that I was trying to make is that I understand that for you, money back in the taxpayer's pocket would be, you know, a direct refund. And that's what would make you feel like we were being fiscally responsible. I'm not trying to say that what we are going to do is the equivalent, but the mechanism that we do have is the tax stabilization fund. And so I was just trying to clarify some of the language around that. And Lisa, if you're able to speak, and you might not be able to, I don't know if it's ever come up, it might be something we have to put a pin in so we can do a little bit of research about if that is something that the district could even do as a possibility. You know, I guess I think that's a question worth answering, because I know that the second you start saying to people, hey, you could get a refund, but the district isn't doing that, that's a question that I think that we need to answer and nip that conversation in the bud, because that is something that, you know, if it's not possible, let's say it. And if it is possible, okay, let's have the conversation and talk about whether or not it's going to work for the district.
So certainly Title 16 is education law and has, you know, speaks to the education funding formula and what is required. So, you know, through the budgeting process, the board used $600,000 from anticipated surplus or tax stabilization, whichever, you know, they're interchangeable, to assist in tax relief. So the $600,000 is the funding for the budget, revenue portion of the budget.
Okay, and I think that actually what you said, it kind of brings up an interesting point, which we don't talk about a lot, but because of Act 60, way back when, 25 years, the tax dollars, this is probably not going to make anyone feel any better, but the tax dollars paid by people in the community, it's not like that check comes to the school district. The tax dollars go to the state, and the state disperses tax dollars based on the education formula. So, So there's not really a one-to-one linear connection between if I paid $1,000 in property taxes, you know, BUUSD didn't necessarily get my $1,000 that went into the pool at the state level and then was dispersed. So my assumption would be that based on that alone, that a refund to taxpayers would be almost impossible because you're not necessarily refunding money that was directly used by the district. I think it's worth a look into, Lisa. I don't know if we have maybe even your auditor can answer it. Like, hey, is this ever done, and is it something that could possibly be done? Because I have a feeling this question is going to come up repeatedly.
Mhm.
So I think it'd be worth just getting a really direct answer about whether or not refunds to taxpayers are something that would even be
Okay.
possible for the district.
Right. And I also want to add that, you know, we wouldn't necessarily want to use more than 600,000, because if we did that this year, then next year we would have to come up with that same amount to offset tax relief. So I think the reason behind trying to be sort of level out. You don't want to have that big tax cliff where you use 600,000 from surplus or your tax stabilization, and then the following year you have nothing. So I think that's something to keep in mind. But I certainly will check with our auditor to see if it ever has been, if it ever has happened before.
Thank you. Josh, do you have another question?
No, I just want to, I actually agree with you, Gina, for once. It's definitely something you guys need to be looking into and research it. And even if it's difficult, I mean, again, I'm not opposed to asking anyone to work hard. But I think it's worth taking a look at, see if it's even possible, and seeing what the steps would be to do it. And I'd actually be more than happy to help you guys work out the math. And I got all kinds of contacts for that kind of stuff. We can figure it out.
Thank you. Moving back, is this something that we want to put a pin in? Are we comfortable making a suggestion about moving funds to capital?
I don't want to say that I necessarily agree with Josh, but I think that the point has been made, and I think that we have, I'm sorry about the piano. That's a baby. He's a genius. I think that to Josh's point, we did have 44% of the people voting against this budget. And I know enough about school funding and managing a school budget to know that it's not as simple as managing my household budget or my business budget. But I think that it is a very complicated thing, and a lot of the language that we use to talk around it can make it feel to someone like who is not familiar with it that we are trying to hide information. And so for the sake of having this, Duncan, he's like actually just a baby. Hold on a second. Here. For the sake of ending the conversation in a way that the community feels like we have not tried to hide information, we are not trying to push forward and be fiscally irresponsible, we are not ignoring their requests, I think it is worth answering that question before we make a recommendation to the board. And I'm sorry to delay things, but I am worried that in our effort to move things forward and in our administration and staff understanding of something that is very complex and almost impossible to explain in an hour-long meeting or 10-port forum post or in any of the stuff we've tried to do, I don't want to be accused of ignoring public sentiment, and I don't want to be accused of making decisions that are fiscally irresponsible and that are ignoring what would be best for our constituents and for the people who are paying for the schools. So if we can wait, then I think that we should get that question answered. And I don't know what the timing is like. I know, Lisa, we can't actually take any action until the audit's complete and the fund balance is finalized, but I'm hoping that we have a month before the next meeting before we have to do this?
So the board could take action to transfer some of the projected surplus to the capital project funds.
But could we wait? also?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. So then that's my recommendation, Sarah. I think that we should wait, see if we can get this question answered, and then pick it up in the next finance meeting and hopefully be able to give a very concise explanation of why we can or cannot issue tax refunds to the taxpayers in, I guess it'd be Barrytown and Barry City.
Okay. That sounds reasonable to me, as long as we're not missing any kind of deadlines or anything like that, as far as we wouldn't have to assign before the audit, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I think
Chris?
I'm sorry, I might even ask our auditor to come and speak about it. Maybe, I'm not sure, if it would be at the next board meeting, but certainly, whatever schedule works for them.
Okay, that sounds like a good idea too. Renee, Chris, does that sound good to you?
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement with Gina. I think that the more informed we are, the better we can explain to the folks of the city and the town. And if it's a really complicated process, at least that's something that we can explain a lot better and it's clear for everybody. Because I think that I agree with Josh that it doesn't hurt to fully understand everything. And so Lisa, do you have resources to be able to get that information to us for the next meeting?
Yes.
Chris, you on board with that? Okay. All right. In that case, we will put a pin in item 5.5, pending additional information. Let's move on to 5.6, and I think there was something in the addendum packet, I believe. Maybe.
Yeah.
Is this, we're starting with the I know this will end up going to policy, but are we looking at the House and Senate resolution?
Yeah.
Okay.
H426, and I know that Jamie spoke to this last night at his committee meeting. So there's been a change to the public bid law, and that's statute Title 16, 559. Projects, services, things like that, over $15,000 needed to be approved. You had to seek 3 qualified bidders, and it needed board approval. That has increased to $40,000. So because we have a policy that speaks to this law and a procedure, we need to, Chris would need to take the policy to the policy committee, and then in my office we would correct the purchasing procedure.
Okay, so what this is saying is, and I think we discussed last night, the $15,000 threshold is inclusive of both parts and labor. So when you're talking about any kind of major repair or construction, $15,000 really doesn't get you far. So the legislation has passed this year that they've increased that amount to $40,000. So whereas we get the RFPs that come to the board for bids, where we have to have 3 bids for anything over $15,000, the state law now says we have to do that for anything over $40,000. So that does free up the administration a little bit, and hopefully will help get things done a little faster without having to come directly to the board. But that is something that I guess will need to be put on the policy agenda, and we have all kinds of hands. Go ahead, Jamie.
Yeah, so I'm ecstatic that they finally raised this. I've been to so many facility director meetings, the VSBA, VSA, places I can't even remember. And we've been pushing for this for so long. And, any of you folks, that have a home, have a business, labor and material, 15,000 doesn't go very far, and especially, in today's world and in the future years coming up. It just really slows the process, anything that does go over 15,000. And, and for some folks, you think, wow, that's a major jump to go from 15 to 40. It's not really, kind of a hand in hand when you do construction projects. Roughly, half of the material or half of the budget is the material, and the other half is the labor. In general terms. So $20,000 in material, again, really doesn't go really, really far on any sizable project. So $40,000, that limit is extremely helpful for us to get projects done. And the common projects that we do on an annual basis, it's the floor tiles, replacing floor tiles and carpeting, some AC replacements, some roofing projects. It just makes it so much more allowable, more efficient, to get this work done. We've had, proven track records that, we get as many projects as we can with what money we have. And this will just speed up the process. It'll streamline it, make it more efficient. So I'm extremely happy with that.
And just to clarify, these aren't projects where you're just given a lump sum of money. These are still things that are already in our budget and that have been, approved by the voters.
Correct.
Chris?
Thanks. So just looking at the addendum, the policy F20 needs to be updated, but the procedure, well, it looks like the procedure will need to be updated also because that also has the 15,000 in it. But given that that's procedure, not policy, is that something still that the policy committee would do, or some other group updates procedures rather than policies?
Yeah, we have several financial procedures on our website, and those come through the business office. So the procedures do not need to go to the board or the policy committee.
Okay, great. And then another question is, in terms of updating F20, do we have a time frame that needs to be done by? Because we just came out with the agenda for next week's meeting, and obviously this isn't on it. So could that be done at a later date?
Yes, we can wait.
Okay, thank you.
Gina?
This might not be a relevant question because I may be misunderstanding. Was the 15,000 also the threshold for requiring a board notification and approval? And has that increased to 40,000 as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. It's statute 559 and it's the public bid law.
Yeah. Okay. So the policy committee is like the one committee I'm not on, but I just want to make sure, and I brought this up before with the $15,000 threshold, that there's something in there that when we have projects that initially come in below that threshold and then go over, that there's some kind of mechanism in there that board approval and notification becomes required. I know I've made a big deal about that before, and I don't need to do it again, but especially with that $40,000 mark, it's pretty easy to bring a project in at easy. Sorry, Jamie, I don't mean to be dismissive of what you do at all, but 38,000, 39,000 is a lot more reasonable than like 14,500. And so I want to make sure that if we have projects coming in below that threshold and then jumping above, that we have board visibility on that as well.
Gina, so is that something that, have you looked at F20 yet? I haven't read the whole thing. I didn't get a chance because the addendum came out today. But is that something that you want to look through and see if that's in there, or you and I should talk, or how? I don't want to miss what you're saying because it won't come on the agenda until July at least. So
you and I can talk, Chris. I don't need to take up any more airtime on it here because I've made the point before in other meetings. I will look through the policy and send you an email with some notes. It's possible it's already in there. I haven't looked through it super closely in this particular meeting. So
okay, thanks.
And we may not necessarily need it to be policy. It could be embedded in the procedure.
Josh, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. So at anything under $40,000, you don't need to have 3 bids anymore. Is that my understanding?
Yes.
I would have to say that's a horrible idea. Even though the state okays it, I would say you should always leave 3 bids is always the minimum. When I was bidding on jobs like that, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, if there's only 3 of us, that'd be kind of scary. I mean, having more than one bid, having more than 3 bids keeps everyone in check, because you might get 3 bids in, 2 will be really close, and one's like half the price. The one that's half the price is going to cost you a fortune in the long run, probably cost you double of everyone else. Same thing is true. You're going to have 2 bids the same, and then one like twice the price. You don't know who is actually going to be bidding, where that price is going to end up. You want a group of bids coming in so you can just check. So it keeps everyone in check. You know where things are going to be. If everyone agrees like within 3%, then one guy's way off, you don't go for that one guy. Something's wrong. So I think it should be a good policy to still shoot for a minimum of 3 bids, but try to get as much as you can. I mean, because I know you say 40,000 isn't that much. 40,000 is a pretty big job for some companies around here, and they might take advantage or they might just misbid it. So be very cautious. Get as many bids as you can.
Okay, thank you. And that is a good point. I'm not going to comment on it because it's really going to the policy committee at this point, and it was passed in the state legislature, so I don't really have an opinion on it. I guess at this point I will defer to the policy committee on that. Andrea?
I just had a question with regards to the statute that is dictating when you must get bids, but could the board, if they wanted to, when they change the policy to talk about the bidding amount, could they still use a different amount that they say they want to see and approve? Can the board say, I want to see it if it's 30,000 or more, or is this statute dictating what the board has to approve, or is it just dictating bidding procedures?
The law is dictating the new public bid law threshold. The board and policy committee could have a different number. Sure.
Also a good question. So again, I'm going to defer to our policy committee, and I believe we have legal representation on that committee too, who could help the committee determine what they want to do with that information.
But again, I would say that it's always better to not restrict yourself, and you can certainly put if the board's wish was to have a different number, it could also be embedded in the procedure as opposed to your policy.
Also a good point. Did we have something else under finance procedures? So the purchasing, or no, that's just a procedure to do with this.
Right. Nope,
Okay.
That was it for this agenda item.
Okay. Any other questions? Again, this will be going before the policy committee later this summer, and then would have to go to the board before any changes could be made, but no. Moving on. Okay. Old business, item 6.1 is the FY21 year-end projections, which is in the original board packet. I mean, we briefly kind of discussed the number of $1.8 million surplus. I know most of this is related to the COVID pandemic, additional funds received, as well as things like supplies that weren't needed to be purchased because schools weren't fully open. Lisa, is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, nothing more. The narrative, does note the discrepancies or variances, and so you did a nice job just explaining the surplus.
Okay. Any questions on that? None. All right. Any other business? No. Items for future agenda. I have, we're going to get some more information about whether a direct taxpayer refund would be possible with surplus funds. And then a discussion about that to make recommendations to the board. We don't usually have a lot of business in July, so I'm not sure what else might need to be on the agenda.
We could certainly review the FY21 year-end projection again.
Mhm. Okay, anybody else have anything they'd like to put there? No? Okay.
I'll throw something out there.
Okay.
Typically, unless it is necessary, usually the board and committees take July off from meetings. So in theory, unless you feel there is a need because we have a lot of transition going on that you need to meet, you could potentially not have a July meeting. Just something to consider.
I was going to mention that traditionally, when I've chaired the finance committee before, we have taken July off, assuming that we have a passed budget, which thankfully we do. The only item, I don't anticipate, Lisa's pretty conservative with her projections. I don't anticipate FY21 projections changing that much. So the only item we do have for agenda for the next meeting would be the surplus funds. And as long as we're not missing any deadlines, I would recommend that maybe we put that off to August if everybody else on the committee is comfortable with that. I know that would free up people for possible vacations and stuff that's already planned for the summer. Does that sound good? Everybody's nodding? Okay. So in that case, I'm going to propose, does anybody know? I'm sorry, I'm horrible, but I know we've changed our original meeting dates. Is it supposed to be the first Monday of the month or the second? The first? Andrea, do you know?
Let me double check that real quick. There's been so many changes lately, I'm losing track.
I think it might be the first. Maybe it used to be the second.
I believe it is the second Tuesday. No, wait, sorry. I'm looking at, no, yeah, it's normally the second Tuesday of the month, and that's why we moved it, because you wanted to hold this meeting after the budget vote. So it was supposed to be the 8th, and we moved it to the 15th. So second Tuesday of the month.
Okay, so I'm a little confused because they have the next meeting date as July 6th, which would have been the first Tuesday. But going on our original schedule, the second Tuesday in August would be the 10th. Would that work for everybody?
Okay, wait a minute. I stand corrected.
Okay.
It was, it is, finance meets the first Tuesday, and I believe it's facilities that normally meets, and we changed them both because of concerns over the budget. So finance does normally meet on the first Tuesday.
Chris, you have a comment, question?
It may be okay given what Andrea just said, but I know that August 9th and 10th are scheduled for our admin retreat, our administrative retreat. So that Monday and Tuesday. So none of us will be available on that Tuesday.
Okay, so let's back that up. And August 3rd would be the first Tuesday of the month. Does that sound good for everybody? 5:30. Chris Parker.
Yeah, Renee sent an email to Sonia today. We didn't hear back yet. In terms of the open meeting law and the changes that have happened for new board members, how do committees usually handle that? Where do committees meet? Do they rotate like the board, or do they meet at one place all the time?
I think, going back to my days, well, I was on committees, we were at the individual schools, but I think a lot of the committees for the supervisory union actually met at central office, but I know they've recommended that we're not doing that. That way we have adequate ability to have people access remotely. So I think it was suggested that we use the library at Spalding, but I think we'll need to get some clarification on that for present in open meeting.
Yeah, because I think going forward and probably for the August meetings, we'll have to have somebody in person somewhere and have the tech set up to be able to be remote and in person.
Yeah, I think Lisa, are you in your office? I think Lisa's technically our in-present person today at the central office. So, but we can check with Sonia. I think she might be traveling today, but I'm sure she'll get back to us soon.
Oh yeah, I'm not worried about that at all. Just a few of us new board members were wondering and just didn't know yet. That's all.
Yeah, it happens so fast.
Yeah.
And like I said, it used to be the supervisory union, a lot were met at the actual central office, but I think they're just trying to make it, I don't know, they were talking about getting tablets or laptops or something so that, whoever was running the meeting could have people access remotely too. So I'm sure that'll come up again next week at the board meeting.
At the board meeting, yep.
Okay. All right, so we've got Tuesday, August 3rd, 5:30 for the next meeting, discussing at least surplus funds. We'll probably have some other agenda items at that point. Anything else from anybody?
So do you not want to have like a final review of the year-end projection? Are you taking that off? Are you just doing this surplus discussion? Or because you had three things originally.
I have three.
You had information regarding overpayments being refunded to taxpayers.
Right.
And then you had a recommendation to the board regarding where to put the surplus funds. And then you had review of the year-end projection, which by August, it will be your final year-end information, I would think. Would that be correct, Lisa, by August?
Yeah.
We won't have a final audit, but we will have a very good sense of our projection, surplus projection. The other thing that happens in August, believe it or not, is the superintendent and I will be sharing the budget development schedule for FY23. So that will probably happen at the board meeting though, so we don't need to do that at finance.
Okay. Yes.
Sorry. Will Lisa be having procedures? She typically used to always go over at least one procedure in every meeting, but maybe we're all caught up with those.
We could certainly review procedures, definitely.
Okay. So 4 items. I had lumped the surplus recommendation and the information on direct refunds into one, but those, I guess it probably would be better if they're separated out. FY21 budget results unaudited, or I'm sorry, financial results unaudited. And then we can throw in financial procedures as well. All right, anything else? No. In that case, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
A second? Chris, thank you. All in favor? All right, 6:59. Have a good evening, everybody.
Bye, guys.
So Lisa, you'll send off the video to Josh and myself, I presume.
Yes, I will.
Okay, thank you very much.
Take care. Have a good night.
You too.